They came in, trusting the people in white coats, and left as numbers on a file no one was ever meant to read. Picture this: a hospital ward, quiet at night, nurses moving between beds with syringes that were never listed on any chart. Patients told it was medicine. It wasn't. It was something else entirely. An experiment, run on human beings, who never said yes. For years, sick men and women walked through those doors, believing they'd be healed. Instead, their bodies became data points in a program so secret that even some of the doctors involved didn't know the full truth. Consent forms were signed, but not the ones that mattered. The real approvals were buried in locked cabinets, hidden from the very people whose lives were being rewritten by needles and pills disguised as care. Some patients grew sicker. Some never left. And for decades, nobody outside those walls knew a thing. This is the story of a hospital that turned healing into a weapon, where the line between doctor and experimenter vanished completely, where trust became the most dangerous thing a patient could give. What happened inside those walls stayed buried for years, until the record surfaced, and the world finally asked the question no one wanted answered. How many more hospitals did the exact same thing? To understand how something this dark could happen, you have to understand the era it grew in. This was a time when medicine moved faster than ethics could keep up. Hospitals were expanding. Research funding was pouring in. And somewhere between ambition and desperation, a terrifying idea took root inside certain institutions. Patients were not just people to heal. They were resources to use. The hospital at the center of this story treated some of the poorest, most vulnerable people in the region. Many had nowhere else to turn. No money for a second opinion. No family fighting on their behalf. No power to question the men in white coats who held their charts, their diagnoses, their fate. That vulnerability wasn't overlooked. It was targeted. Behind closed doors, a select group of physicians began running unauthorized trials, disguised as standard treatment. New drugs, untested procedures, doses far beyond anything considered safe. And every single one of it was recorded, not for the patient's benefit, but for research papers that would never carry their names. Staff who noticed irregularities were told to stay quiet. Questions were discouraged. Files were coded in language designed to confuse anyone who might read them later. For a while, it worked perfectly. The hospital kept its reputation, the doctors kept their funding, and the patients kept getting sicker with no idea why. The hospital's leadership presented an image of compassion to the public. Charity galas, glowing press releases, awards for community service. Behind that image, a different institution operated entirely on its own rules, answerable to no one but itself. Then, one nurse found something in the archive room that was never supposed to see daylight again, a folder labeled with a word that would unravel everything. The folder was labeled Protocol, and inside it was a truth far worse than anyone imagined. It wasn't one rogue doctor. It was a system, a structured, funded, carefully documented program built to test substances and procedures on patients who had no idea they were subjects at all. Admission forms were rewritten so ordinary treatment consent quietly covered experimental use too, buried in fine print. Nobody explained out loud. Internal records showed dosage levels adjusted specifically to observe reactions, not to treat illness. Some patients were kept on trial compounds even after showing clear signs of harm, because stopping early would have ruined the data. One entry in the archive, dated years before the exposure, noted that a patient's deteriorating condition was expected and consistent with projected outcomes. Not a warning, not a reason to stop, a checkbox. Here is the moment that changes everything. The hospital wasn't hiding this from regulators alone. Internal memos reveal senior staff knew, discussed it in meetings, and chose silence because the funding tied to these trials kept the entire institution afloat. Money moved from research grants straight into hospital operations no patient ever saw a receipt for. Nurses who raised concerns were reassigned. One doctor who threatened to go public disappeared from hospital records entirely. His resignation dated months before anyone remembers him actually leaving. The victims were rarely told what was done to them. Many died without ever learning their illness had been made worse deliberately. In a building they trusted with their lives, their families received condolences, never explanations. For every patient who noticed something wrong, 10 more never suspected a thing. That is what made this so effective and so unforgivable. Auditors who later reviewed the archive described the paperwork as unusually thorough for something so criminal, as if the people responsible believed they would never be caught and never be asked to explain a single page of it. When the folder finally reached outside eyes, the fallout was slow and painfully incomplete. Journalists who obtained copies of the internal files faced legal threats before a single story ran. The hospital's lawyers argued the records were misinterpreted research notes, not evidence of abuse. For a while, that argument almost worked. But too many names existed in those pages. Too many dates lined up with patients who had died under unexplained circumstances. Investigators outside the hospital's control began cross-referencing death certificates with the coded trial logs, and the pattern was impossible to deny. Public pressure eventually forced an inquiry. A handful of senior staff faced hearings. Licenses were revoked. Fines were paid. But here is the part that still stings decades later. No one involved ever faced criminal prison time proportional to what was done. Most retired quietly. Some kept practicing medicine elsewhere, their records scrubbed of any mention of what happened. The victims and their families received settlements that amounted to a fraction of what their suffering was worth. Many never received a formal apology at all. Some families are still searching for answers about relatives whose cause of death was never fully explained. Why does this matter today? Because the same vulnerabilities that made this possible, poverty, silence, unquestioned authority, still exist in healthcare systems around the world. Every time a patient is too afraid to ask what's really in the syringe, this history repeats itself in smaller, quieter ways. This case became a warning etched into modern medical ethics training, a reminder that informed consent isn't a formality, it's the only thing standing between healing and harm. And it is a warning that institutions, when left unchecked, will choose their own survival over the people they swore to protect. Even now, researchers describe it as a turning point. One of the reasons modern oversight boards exist at all. History doesn't repeat because people forget it. It repeats because silence is easier than confrontation, and trust is easier to exploit than to earn honestly. The patients in this story believed in something simple, that the people caring for them would never turn their pain into profit. That belief was betrayed in the quietest, most bureaucratic way possible, through paperwork, protocol, and silence dressed up as procedure. Power without accountability will always find a way to justify itself. That is the real disease this story exposes. Not a drug, not a hospital, but the unchecked authority that let ordinary people become unwilling subjects in someone else's ambition. So ask yourself this. If it happened once, hidden for years behind locked cabinets and coded files, how would you ever know if it was happening somewhere right now? Tell me what you think really deserves justice here, down in the comments. And if stories like this deserve to be remembered instead of buried again, stay subscribed, because history like this only stays hidden if we let it.